George Orwell is one of the most popular writers of the last century, whose dystopian visions are often used to comment on current politics. Interestingly, conservative circles fond of references to 1984 or Animal Farm often overlook or are unaware that George Orwell identified himself as a socialist. Let's take a closer look at how Orwell understood socialism and how his participation in the Spanish Civil War influenced his beliefs and work. When George Orwell joined a militia affiliated with the Communist Party to fight against the fascists. The Spanish Civil War officially began on July 17, 1936, when a group of anti-government conservatives, led by high-ranking military officers, sparked a series of uprisings aimed at overthrowing the democratically elected coalition of mainly liberal and leftist parties. The initial leader of the rebellion was General José Sanjurjo, but he was replaced by General Francisco Franco within a few months. Franco led the right-wing opposition to victory in 1939 and ruled Spain as a dictator until his death in November 1975. Morocco, a Spanish protectorate, played a significant role in the uprising. The fascists took over the colony within a few days and then used it as a base to send troops composed mainly of Moors to the Iberian Peninsula. They expected to capture Madrid within a few weeks, as the majority of the military stationed in the capital and countryside remained loyal to the fascist generals. The government had to arm mostly untrained factory workers and anyone willing to serve. To the surprise of the fascists and the entire world, the rebels were stopped, and Madrid remained in the hands of the government. Throughout Spain, many similar anti-fascist groups managed to hold back the army, and by August, Seville was the only major city controlled by the Franco. Therefore, as early as July, Nazi Germany unofficially sent weapons and military advisors to the fascists. Similarly, Portugal discreetly transported weapons and equipment for Franco across the border. Meanwhile, Mussolini's Italy provided more overt support, supplying Franco with over 50,000 soldiers and aviators, and utilizing its Mediterranean fleet to blockade supplies destined for the government forces. On the other hand, the most powerful ally of the government supporters was Joseph Stalin. Despite signing the Non-Intervention Pact, he immediately began equipping merchant ships with additional false decks to conceal the transport of weapons and equipment, as well as flying fake flags on them. Around 500 Soviet soldiers arrived at the front lines, but even more significant was the arrival of 2,000 to 3,000 so-called military advisors, most of whom belonged to the NKVD or were affiliated with it. When in the Barcelona office of the Independent Labour Party a representative of the working class asked Orwell why he had come to Spain, he simply replied that he had come to join the militia to fight against fascism. Orwell, convinced that fascism was inherently evil, did not fully understand why it attracted so many people or what exactly could it give to its followers. Orwell became a member of the armed militia of the PUM, Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, due to the party's connections with the British Independent Labour Party, although he did not fully understand the ideas underlying the Spanish Party. In reality, even people associated with the PUM were uncertain about it. The PUM supported socialism and various aspects of communism while distancing itself from the mainstream communists aligned with the Soviets. Instead, it formed an alliance with anarchist and anarcho-syndicalist groups that were flourishing in Catalonia. Despite their differences, the three groups shared a common goal: the revolution aimed against authoritarianism. Everyone wanted to overthrow the orthodox social system that had prevailed in Spain until the 1930s, which was characterized by a pseudo-feudal state dominated by the aristocracy, wealthy landowners, the military, and the Catholic Church. However, they did not intend to replace one form of absolutism with another, and therefore they were opposed to the communists, as they believed it would lead to their own annihilation by the latter group. Although Orwell was reading all available news reports, he was aware that the loyalty of individual newspapers to specific political groups or ideologies led to the distortion of facts. For example, Claude Cockburn, who had his own column in the Daily Worker, the propaganda newspaper of the Communist Party, later admitted to fabricating stories about Republican successes when he did not have access to information about the actual events. Additionally, in George's opinion, the jargon of the far left, class consciousness, seizing the means of production, bourgeois ideology, proletarian solidarity, discourages people whose lives Marxism promises to transform. In his opinion, socialism had to be based on a simple formula that took into account the fact that all people with modest and uncertain incomes are in the same boat and should fight on the same side against economic inequalities. The label of the proletariat should equally apply to the village shopkeeper, the lowest paid civil servant, as well as to the ordinary worker on the assembly line. This category also includes teachers, starving journalists, and unemployed Cambridge graduates. The skirmishes in Barcelona began around the telephone exchange, which was taken over by anarchists, and on May 3, the Guardia Civil attempted to seize it, leading to gunfire exchange. Initially, the clashes involved small units, but quickly engulfed the entire city. On May 20, Orwell was shot in the throat. The sniper's bullet passed through his neck, narrowly missing the artery and spine, but damaging his vocal cord. Although he was considered mortally wounded at the base, he survived. However, his war was over. Despite diagnosis that he would never speak again, he gradually regained his voice through electrotherapy, but it remained flat and lacking emotions from that time onward. While Orwell was staying in a sanatorium, a ceasefire between local militia groups and various government forces, including the civil guard and the police, was broken. The communists took advantage of the power vacuum in the region, dominated the Catalan administration, and launched a campaign of official propaganda portraying the POUM and anarchists as Trotskyists, allegedly helping the Phalangists and undermining Soviet support for the Republicans. The conflict escalated. Government forces carried out orders from the communists aimed at eliminating the POUM and anarchists. NKVD agents were directly involved in actions that included arrests without trial, torture, and executions of members of the POUM and individuals associated with the party. When Orwell was discharged from service due to his health condition, the POUM and its affiliated organizations had been declared illegal, and any suspicions of collaboration would lead to immediate arrests by the civil guard or, worse, detention by the NKVD. Over the next 10 days, Orwell evaded capture in the country. Eventually, he boarded a train heading towards the border and deliberately took a seat in the dining car, where he could blend in with the crowd of political observers, tourists, and journalists. He crossed the border without any interrogations. During his entire stay in Spain, Orwell made notes for his subsequent books. This time, he had doubts about whether the commissioned book he was supposed to write upon his return to England would be accepted by his publisher. As he stated, it was meant to be more than a mere account of his experiences in the Spanish Civil War. The book was also intended to demonstrate how Stalinist communists systematically undermined the cause for which the Republicans were fighting. This referred to Animal Farm. Orwell now began to view socialism as a commitment to improving the life of the poor and oppressed while distancing himself from any rigid ideology or doctrine. 3 weeks after George crossed the border, a certain document reached the Espionage and High Treason Tribunal in Valencia. It stated that Orwell is definitely a Trotskyist and that he participated in the May events, attempting to weaken the Republican forces on behalf of Franco. The tribunal was under the control of the NKVD, and although Orwell was no longer in Spain, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. In 1943, the British conveniently ignored the recent Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet aggression against Poland that followed it, and the fact that the Soviet Union was a totalitarian state, all out of respect for their current allies, the Soviets. It was then that Orwell's novel finally took shape. In 1938, Orwell wrote to a friend who was also in Spain about what this experience meant to him. "I am not a Marxist, and I do not adhere to everything that boils down to the words every action that helps achieve the party's goal is just. Animal Farm tells the story of what happens when individuals cease to act according to their own conscience, or their own understanding of good and evil." In this regard, according to Orwell, hardened party communists were similar fascists. Animal Farm was intended to be a tale about the fine line between idealism and blind, inhumane behavior. During the war, Orwell saw phalangists running along the trench border, an easy target for any shooter with average skills. He aimed but couldn't pull the trigger. The man had lost his belt, and was awkwardly running while holding up his trousers. At that moment, he ceased to be a fascist in the writer's eyes and became a somewhat comical, defenseless human being. Orwell didn't shoot. He made a similar decision when he entered the Phalangists' trench and pressed the bayonet against the chest of an unarmed lone soldier. Why kill another human being just for the sake of killing? This attitude is deserving of special attention. George Orwell, being a socialist himself and recognizing fascism as a fundamentally evil ideology, was also able to see the humanity in those who served it. This is the exact opposite of what is often done with the word fascist today. Nowadays, it happens that the accusation of fascism is often used, sometimes fabricated, as a pretext to dehumanize and degrade political opponents. It is often suggested that if we simply label someone as a fascist, then violence against them is fully justified. However, George Orwell was able to see the humanity in fascist soldiers. He saw individuals who were serving evil but still had dignity. And when we look at history, we see that those who declared a fight against evil, while disregarding human dignity, often turned out to be just as malevolent. Many thanks to our patrons who allow us to cover more controversial topics. If you don't want to miss any future episodes, please allow notifications.